Okay, in talking about site selection, we want to submit soil samples through your county extension office, or you can go through one of the private labs. With blueberries, we say if you've got less than 2,500 pounds of calcium in your soil per acre, we can adjust that pH pretty easily. If it's above that, it's a fight because you've got all that lime in the soil and it just keeps buffering the pH up as you put sulfur on. Then we put phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and maybe sulfur on, and put this down preferably at least 2 months before planting. And if we're using sulfur, it takes about a year to react. Now, sulfur is an organic way of lowering the soil pH. Some of the other materials might not be considered organic. Blueberries are sensitive to chloride, so I don't think you'd be using potassium sulfate for organic production, but so you want to use potassium sulfate rather than potassium chloride. If you're going to put sulfur on, we can tell you how much to put on based on the type of soil that you have, whether it's a sandy soil or a clay soil. It takes more for a clay soil. It takes about a year for sulfur to fully react. And since bacteria in the soil break that sulfur down and turn it to sulfuric acid, that soil temperature needs to be about 60 degrees, so nothing's happening in the winter other than maybe that sulfur leaching in a little bit. You can buy sulfur as prills, as pellets, or you can put the powdered sulfur on. The powdered sulfur is a lot more difficult to spread. The prills take a little longer to get that pH adjusted because they've got to decompose. We've talked about raised beds. Blueberries will stand flooding. Any plant will stand a little flooding during the dormant season. It's during the growing season where flooding is the hardest on them. If you put them on raised beds, it increases your need for irrigation. If you can plant blueberries in the fall, that's better. That gives them a chance to root in over the winter, and then you're not fighting to get them in the spring, get them planted in the spring when the soil's too wet to work, and the later you put them in, the less growth you'll get that year. But you want to put them in if they're dormant, if you've got bare root plants. Ideally, we like to have north-south rows. If you're going to U-pick, you need some crossway rows to get across there. We've talked about subsoiling. Planting distances, I like 4 feet between plants. You know, out in Oregon, they're putting them 3 feet apart for machine harvest. But when they get real crowded like that, you've got to do a little more pruning on them. We can figure plants per acre. This is a gadget that Terry Jones put together a number of years ago in Jackson for making raised beds for blueberries. You can see the raised bed there. And you want to get that soil up in the raised bed rather than making that all organic matter, because that organic matter will decay over time and you'll have flat blueberries after a while. We like to put organic matter in the bed. We like to mix peat moss in the row, going down the row. If you can get decomposed pine bark, composted pine bark, that works just as well as decomposed or as peat. And then you want to dig those holes a little wider hole. You want to be able to spread those roots out. You don't want to cram that blueberry plant in a little hole or shove it in so the roots are going up. That's called root wadding. They don't grow very well that way. And if you're using an auger and that soil's a little wet, make sure you scrape the sides of the hole so it doesn't make a flower pot. We recommend mixing more peat in with the roots when you're planting. We do not use sawdust in those holes, even composted sawdust. It takes nitrogen. Now you'll find recommendations from the Northeast that say we mix sawdust in the beds, and that ties up nitrogen. Our sawdust here is mostly oak sawdust that tends to raise the pH. Pine trees are all they have out on the West Coast. That doesn't change the pH much, and that seems to work pretty well for them. Here's a situation where the blueberries were planted a little bit too deep. You know, we put those blueberries in and then we pile sawdust up around them. That's different than piling soil up around them. And this is a case where a lot of these plants died because the soil level was too far up on the stem. So you want to plant those at the same level they were growing in the nursery. Here's some mulching with sawdust. That's inadequate. That's not doing the job right there. That's just, you want a whole row of sawdust down there. Pine needles are not very readily available. They work pretty well. Tree trimmings work pretty well for us. Keep in mind that these tree trimmings and so forth, as that sawdust breaks down, it's got calcium in it, so it releases, it tends to raise the soil pH over time. Mulching is very important, 4 to 6 inches deep. Then reapply it when it rots down. May take remulching every couple years. You'll find a lot of roots growing at that mulch interface. Mulch releases nitrogen over a long period of time. Blueberries really like that. If you've got a lot of blueberries to mulch, some of these pieces of equipment that they use to fill cattle troughs with feed work really well. It's better to mulch when you don't have a lot of leaves or blossoms in there. Big question about landscape fabric. I've seen variable results with landscape fabric in Kentucky. Here's one where it's not doing so well. Sometimes that landscape fabric can keep those blueberries too wet if they're on flat soil. This is something I saw last fall in Oregon for machine harvest. They are putting all their blueberries in using landscape fabric with what they call a zippered system. It's split down the middle right here and it's pegged together. You can see right here where it's pegged together on the end, and they typically put 2 irrigation tubes in there, 1 on each side of the plant. This has got 4. This is a research plot. They wouldn't let us take pictures out in the commercial field, so I don't have any of those. But they put all the fertilizer in through the irrigation tubes. They have this zippered deal here. It's zippered, so about every 5 or 6 years they open it up and they throw pine mulch in there and then close it back up. It gets too hot for those blueberry roots, and that mulch tends to keep those roots cooler, and it supplies organic matter for them. This is an organic deal, but I told you that herbicides, they need mulch. Okay, you want to put mulch on there. That keeps that soil cooler, the roots grow, it releases nutrients. So we strongly recommend mulch. Those are little itty-bitty plants for a 7-year-old plant where they're not mulched.